10,850 tons of armored steel moved through a brutal force 9 gale off the Orkney Islands. It was the 5th of June, 1916. His Majesty's ship Hampshire was carrying the British Secretary of State for War on a diplomatic transit to Russia. The mission required navigating through one of the most violent bodies of water on Earth. A severe storm hammered the hull as the cruiser pushed through heavy seas. Beneath the surface lay an unseen perimeter of naval mines. A German submarine, U-75, had laid a minefield off Marwick Head about a week earlier. The cruiser drove its bow directly into the explosive perimeter. The resulting detonation initiated a catastrophic sequence of structural and physical failures that would extinguish 737 lives. The blast ripped a massive void into the lower hull directly between the bow and the forward bridge section. The primary explosive force punched inward, instantly shattering the watertight integrity of the forward compartments. Seawater flooded through the breach with violent force. Power and lighting appear to have failed as the ship settled, leaving the crew trapped in darkness while the forward compartments filled faster than any emergency response could control. The immense volume of water rushing into the forward section radically shifted the center of gravity. The bow began to pull downward. As the front of the vessel sank deeper, the center of buoyancy shifted aft, completely destabilizing the armored cruiser. Wind and wave action accelerated the disaster. The severe gale battered the dying ship, compounding the massive internal weight imbalance. The loss of righting moment meant the ship could no longer recover from the severe rolling forces of the storm. Within 15 minutes of the mine strike, the cruiser reached the point of no return. The sheer mass of flooded compartments overwhelmed the remaining buoyancy. The hull rolled entirely over. The vessel capsized, sealing the fate of the men trapped inside. Only 12 individuals survived, reaching the shore on small floating rafts after the cruiser went down. 737 men were lost in the deep. The ship plummeted through the dark water. It struck the seabed in approximately 60 meters of water, roughly 200 feet below the surface. The violent descent ended with a colossal impact against the ocean floor, leaving the wreck completely inverted. The entire upper deck, the bridge, and the heavy superstructure were driven directly into the seabed. The falling weight of the 10,850-ton hull acted like a massive press. It crushed the upper decks into the soft silt. The primary exterior hull now formed an impenetrable steel roof over the main deck. The resting environment was exceptionally hostile. The wreck lay roughly 1.5 miles off Marwick Head. This specific location is notorious for extreme tidal flows and severe weather systems. It is a high-energy tidal zone where the ocean constantly scours the seabed. The sheer velocity of the water movement makes basic navigation perilous, and deep water operations nearly impossible. The deep, hostile environment established an immediate physical boundary around the wreck. The freezing water, total darkness, and sweeping currents protected the site from early intervention. Yet the inverted orientation preserved critical forensic data. The massive blast damage between the bow and the bridge remained fully exposed on the primary hull. This void would serve as the definitive physical proof of the mine strike. The inward tearing of the steel plates documented the exact mechanics of the explosion, locking the sequence of destruction into the metal for decades. With the blast scar exposed and the site isolated beyond early reach, the armored cruiser remained inaccessible until later technical access and unauthorized exploitation forced a definitive response. For decades, access to the sunken cruiser remained tightly controlled, and the available record of the wreck was limited. As the centenary approached, that policy began to shift from exclusion toward controlled scientific assessment. To understand the severity of this specific mandate, the timeline of previous human intervention must be examined. That natural security failed as offshore commercial diving technology advanced. Between 1977 and 1983, controversial commercial salvage teams descended on the wreck. These early interventions were not delicate forensic surveys. They were heavy industrial extractions aimed purely at recovering high-value scrap metals from the seabed. Utilizing aggressive and destructive recovery methods, commercial operators targeted massive exterior components. They forcefully removed the heavy starboard propeller. This brute force intervention caused severe collateral disruption to the surrounding site footprint. The heavy lifting operations dragged massive rigging and industrial cables across the deteriorating steel. This unauthorized extraction tore into the historical context and permanently altered the resting state of the wreck. The institutional response to this industrial stripping was severe, but it did not happen in a single stroke. The British government enacted the Protection of Military Remains Act in 1986, creating the legal framework for protecting military wrecks from unauthorized interference. HMS Hampshire was later designated as a controlled site under that framework, placing a strict legal perimeter around the wreck coordinates. Any further diving operations now required a highly restricted government permit. Removing any artifact, penetrating the interior watertight spaces, or even physically disturbing the external outer hull plates became a severe criminal offense. The law established an absolute no-touch boundary. The state effectively removed the wreck from ordinary public access and commercial exploitation while preserving a narrow route for licensed, tightly controlled research. This strict legal seal remained unbroken for decades. However, as the centenary of the sinking approached, maritime authorities faced a distinct management dilemma. The government lacked a modern, quantifiable baseline. The deep water currents were relentless, and without fresh data, authorities could not measure how fast the harsh marine environment was degrading the primary structure. Furthermore, they had no accurate map detailing exactly how much collateral damage the commercial salvage teams had inflicted during the 1980s. The state needed accurate answers, yet any inspection method had to avoid even accidental disturbance. To solve this data deficit, the Ministry of Defense granted a highly specific permit to an authorized scientific collaborative. The mandate was to execute a comprehensive condition assessment exactly 100 years after the disaster. This required a tightly regulated observational approach: no recovery, no penetration, no removal, and no disturbance of the fragile wreck. The team had to document environmental deterioration and the physical impact of the unauthorized 1980s salvage while leaving the war grave entirely undisturbed. Legal access was finally granted, but the survey team now faced a staggering technical hurdle. They had to engineer a method to capture high-resolution data in severe ocean currents without ever making physical contact with a single plate of steel. The technical problem now narrowed to data quality. Acoustic pulses had to hold a clean path through heavy tidal shear while the current tried to push the sensor array offline. In 2016, the authorized technical team deployed a Predator Inspection Class ROV to work through this environmental friction. The remotely operated vehicle carried imaging and scanning systems into a site where current, depth, and legal restrictions left very little margin for error. At depth, the non-disturbance mandate created tight operational restrictions. The team had to avoid any action that could disturb the wreck or its surrounding seabed. Every mapping maneuver had to be executed with controlled standoff, continuously adjusting to the ocean drag while preserving the integrity of the protected site. To generate a detailed three-dimensional acoustic map under these limits, the survey used a high-frequency multi-beam echo sounder, identified in the technical record as a seabed T-50-P. The instrument projects a rapid fan of sound waves into the darkness. When these pulses strike the dense steel or the seabed, they reflect back to the receiver. The system calculates the exact return time of tens of thousands of individual sound strikes per second. This dense geometric data creates a highly accurate point cloud, translating acoustic reflections into a digital model of the structure. Building the full map required meticulous execution. The pilot could not simply fly in a straight line. They had to execute overlapping grid patterns. Each pass captured a specific swath of the seabed. The multi-beam swath had to overlap the previous run by a significant margin to ensure no data gaps existed. The complex shape of the massive wreckage created severe acoustic shadows. An acoustic shadow occurs when a large physical structure blocks the sound pulses from hitting the seabed behind it, leaving a blank space in the digital model. To eliminate these blind spots, the pilot had to fly the vehicle across multiple intersecting trajectories. They aimed the sonar heads at oblique angles, firing sound waves beneath overhanging structures to capture the full structural profile. Gathering this acoustic data in a moving water column introduced a severe tracking problem. Because the tide constantly shoved the vehicle off its axis, the acoustic returns would distort if the system did not know exactly where the receiver was at all times. To solve this, the surface crew relied on acoustic positioning and survey control to track the remote vehicle and geo-reference its returns. By fusing the tracking data with the multi-beam returns, the software could correct for tidal drift and build a coherent model of the wreck site. The acoustic array mapped the massive geometry, but optical verification remained necessary. The remote vehicle carried high-definition visual sensors to confirm what the sound waves detected. Floating particulate scattered the artificial light, forcing the pilot closer to jagged steel edges whenever visual confirmation was required. This proximity introduced the ultimate operational risk. If the heavy umbilical cable powering the vehicle snagged on a sharp hull plate, the crew would be forced to pull the line tight to break it free. That physical force would instantly violate the zero-contact legal mandate. The surface vessel was simultaneously subjected to surface gales and heavy swell. As the ship heaved on the waves, that kinetic energy transferred down the control cable toward the underwater vehicle. Careful tether management and disciplined vessel handling were essential to keep the remote vehicle clear of the wreck. Through disciplined restraint and precise flight control, the team completed the acoustic sweep of the primary hull without adding a modern drag scar to the protected site. The 10,850-ton mass of the armored cruiser rests in a permanent geometry trap. The comprehensive acoustic mapping confirms the primary hull lies completely inverted on the ocean floor. This upside-down orientation dictates exactly what the scientific survey can prove, and what must remain forever hidden. The acoustic returns verify that the superstructure is compressed and buried in the soft silt, with the bridge, primary command spaces, and entire upper deck pinned beneath the inverted hull. This inverted topography establishes the survey's hard-proof ceiling. Remote mapping could not see through the hull bottom to assess the upper works pinned beneath it. The deeper watertight compartments also remain beyond the investigation, leaving the operational command centers structurally pinned and out of reach. While the upper decks are permanently locked away beneath the silt, the inverted orientation prominently displays the primary site of the fatal trauma. The digital acoustic model clearly defines a massive exterior breach located directly between the bow and the forward section. The acoustic shadows and visual feeds map the dimensions of this fatal structural wound. The heavy steel hull plates point violently inward toward the center line, preserving the pressure signature of an external explosion without requiring the vehicle to cross into the interior. Beyond the primary blast zone, a century of hostile marine exposure had opened limited windows through the outer hull. The acoustic sensors mapped structural tears along the exposed upper strakes, and the remote cameras used those failures to verify surviving torpedo tubes and machinery inside the fractured hull. The coherent main structure gives the survey its clearest result: a fixed digital record of the lower hull, the fatal mine wound, and the upper works that non-intrusive methods could not reach. Beyond that main body, the blast, capsize, impact, and later unauthorized interventions cast a wider scatter of steel across the seabed. The seabed immediately surrounding the armored cruiser presents a complex forensic contradiction. Evidence from 1916 lies beside the modern overprint of unauthorized industrial extraction. The survey team had to map the detached material while separating the original disaster sequence from later interference. Expanding outward from the coherent hull, the remote acoustic sensors sweep a wide perimeter across the soft silt. The digital mapping data reveals a massive scatter pattern extending away from the primary wreckage. The survey team commands the remote vehicle to push out into the dark water to document the very edge of this defined debris field. Here, they identified detached secondary armaments of the armored cruiser. Heavy 6-inch breech-loading guns lay completely separated from the ship. These massive defensive weapons were recorded on the surrounding seabed at distances of up to roughly 30 meters, or nearly 100 feet, from the main body of the wreckage. The presence of these heavy 6-inch guns resting nearly 100 feet away documents major displacement, but the exact mechanism requires careful interpretation. During the chaotic capsize and the violent descent to the ocean floor, hydraulic forces and bottom impact may have helped separate weapons from their mounts. However, the modern survey data also shows that later salvage activity disturbed the site, so the displacement cannot be assigned to a single cause with absolute certainty. The digital scan of the extreme stern section documents the clearest modern disruption. The port side bronze propeller remains secured to its drive shaft, while the starboard propeller is entirely missing, direct evidence of pre-protection commercial salvage. That absence forced the team to distinguish original sinking damage from later human alteration across the stern and surrounding debris. Despite the modern overprint, the non-contact survey locked the exposed debris field into the digital record, measuring major plates, mechanical fragments, and scattered secondary armaments from a safe distance. Yet the external map could not resolve every origin point. Because the permit forbade intrusion into the main wreck, the team could not trace scattered fragments back through sealed compartments or match them to the interior voids left behind. The scattered artifacts therefore remain in place, documented but not physically reconnected to their parent structure. The perimeter is finalized and the historical damage parsed, leaving only the question of permanent stewardship. Exactly 100 years passed between the violent capsize of the armored cruiser and the successful completion of the comprehensive acoustic mapping. 100 years of relentless exposure to the high-energy tidal zone had steadily weakened the massive outer hull. This passing of a full century completely shifted the operational reality of the wreck site. The Ministry of Defense no longer viewed the sunken vessel simply as an inaccessible historical loss. It had become a deteriorating structure actively under attack by the harsh marine environment. To properly manage this ongoing natural destruction required a fixed, unquestionable data point. The Centenary survey generated that exact requirement by establishing a permanent digital condition baseline. The completed three-dimensional dataset now gives future marine engineers a fixed point of comparison. It records the exposed wreck, the inward mine tear, and the major debris in the surrounding mud, allowing later surveys to quantify corrosion, collapse, and structural loss without relying on intrusive inspection. With this condition baseline locked, the location remains a controlled military maritime grave under the Protection of Military Remains Act of 1986. Future access is license-based, and any surface or underwater activity must avoid disturbing the protected coordinates. This permanent legal denial enforces a strict limit on any future recovery operations, regardless of the historical value of the sunken materials. Even if advanced deep-water robotics eventually make it trivial to extract heavy components from severe tidal zones, the governing jurisdiction absolutely forbids the action. The remaining port-side bronze propeller, the exposed internal machinery, and the scattered defensive weapons remain on the seabed, unless a future authority grants a specific and exceptional license. Under the present stewardship approach, recovering physical artifacts is treated as unjustified. The remaining secrets held deep within the crushed superstructure and the sealed compartments will likely dissolve into the ocean over the coming centuries. There is no present plan for final intrusive verification. Instead of historical exploitation, the site now exists under a disciplined watch list regime. The survey proved that high-resolution acoustic knowledge could be drawn from a volatile, deep ocean environment without adding a modern scar to the wreck. The state now holds the mapping array as an archival record of the disaster, with the modern operation defined less by extraction than by restraint. Under formal protection, the cruiser remains in the same hostile setting that shaped its loss and preserved its evidence. Future comparison surveys can now measure the slow natural destruction with far greater precision than before. The digital mapping data remains the operative record of a war grave studied through monitoring, not extraction.